The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Some Sadducees, those who denied that there is a resurrection, came forward and put this question to Jesus, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us, if someone's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, his brother must take the wife and raise up descendants for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman but died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and likewise all the 7 died childless. Finally the woman also died. Now at the resurrection, whose wife will that woman be? For all 7 had been married to her." Jesus said to them, "The children of this age marry and remarry, but those who are deemed worthy to attain to the coming age and to the resurrection of the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. They can no longer die, for they are like angels, and they are the children of God, because they are the ones who will rise. That the dead will rise, even Moses made known in the passage about the bush, when he called out, 'Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.' And he is not God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive." The Gospel of the Lord. Whose wife will she be? Whose wife will she be? The Sadducees have presented this story to Jesus about this woman. She married a man. They were childless. Man died. Where, according to the law, the brother had a responsibility, so he married her. And then he died. Then the next brother, and the next brother, and the next brother. There were 7. They married this woman, and they all died. Now, I don't know about your reaction to this account, but I'd call the police. They need to check her basement. Where are all these husbands going? She continues on, and they just die one after the other. The reason for the story, it is sort of a silly story. The people would have laughed at this story. It's so ridiculous. But the Sadducees were trying to make a point with Jesus. Now, the Sadducees were a group among the Jewish leaders who believed that everything they needed to know was in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And if it wasn't there, it wasn't true. Something that wasn't in the Old Testament, in the Torah, was mention of the resurrection of the dead, life eternal. Didn't even mention angels. Pharisees, on the other hand, believed in the resurrection and believed in angels. So the Sadducees are testing Jesus to see what he'll say about this incident with these 7 husbands. But Jesus says that people who die don't need to marry or remarry. They don't need to be married because there's life after death, but they are like angels. There's no marrying in heaven. What he's doing is very revolutionary when it comes to women. Because what he's saying is that when people die, there's life everlasting. And the status of the men or the women have nothing to do with whether they're married or not. It has to do that they're all children of God. equally created. Now, in this culture, women were very much in a down position. They had no voice. Without a man, they really had no life. Widows were called the voiceless. They didn't have a father or a husband or an adult son. They had no one to speak for them. And so Jesus is countering that, saying, no, they're all children of God. Women's relationship to men has nothing to do with that. It has to do with their relationship to God. So very revolutionary. People would have been surprised. And so he goes on, Jesus does, to talk about God as the God of the living. Remembers Moses speaking to the burning bush out in the desert in the book of Exodus. Moses comes upon this bush. It's all afire, but not consumed. And a voice starts speaking to him out of the bush. And so Moses wanted to have a name for the voice. What's your name? The voice said, I am who am, or I am. That's important because Jesus will use that term different times in the gospel. He'll say at one point, before Abraham came to be, I am. He's associating himself with the voice in the burning bush, the voice of God. Second person of the Blessed Trinity. Not incarnate yet, not yet Jesus. But still the same person, and Jesus remembers that in some way. And so Moses calls out, Lord, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob. Meaning that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive, even though they lived hundreds of years before Moses. And he believes that because God is the God of the living, not the dead. And so even though this belief in the resurrection is not contained in the Torah, as the Sadducees were focused in on, it is a belief that grew throughout the Jewish experience. And so when Jesus comes, he affirms the fact, yes, there is life after death. It's not controversial. The Father has a place for you in his house when you die. The Sadducees were representing an ideology. The ideology that if it wasn't in the Torah, we won't believe it. So they could stand there and interact with Jesus all day. Jesus talked to them, yes, the resurrection, yes, there's life after death. He'd go on no place with these people because they're tied in to their system of belief. An ideology is a set of beliefs, system, that's closed. It's not open to interpretation or to changes. And so if you want to converse with someone who lives in an ideology or an ideological world, you're not going to get any place with them, just like Jesus didn't get any place with the Sadducees. He didn't convince them because they were closed to anything he had to say that countered their belief. And some of that can be true about us. We can have our beliefs that are closed off. Or we deal with people who live by an ideology, which means that you really can't discuss what they have in their closed system. Because if they admit that something in that system is changing, then the system falls apart. Racism is an ideology. And so if you run into someone who's speaking from the perspective from an ideology, it's important to recognize that. That especially comes up with issues like religion, politics, maybe the role of women, all kinds of issues an ideology might crop up. And if you find yourself wanting to discuss an issue and not getting any place, you can talk, you're blue in the face, This person is not going to agree. What this usually ends up in is people being mad. They have an argument. You're not going any place with this discussion. You may have something you want to talk about with this person, but they won't admit it. They won't admit your perspective, and so just shut you out. That's someone who lives in an ideology. So it's important in this time, things are very rambunctious these days. They're part of the tension that people have locked into these ideological frameworks that don't admit any intervention. This is what I believe. You talk to me different, I'll get mad. Or I'll hate you. Or I'll say bad things about you. And so the result of that in this modern world is that people have trouble communicating. Just as Jesus had trouble communicating with these Sadducees. He's not going to convince them there's resurrection. This is not part of their belief system. And so when we talk with other people, that's something for us to be careful about ourselves. Do we really want to talk about something, have a discussion, conversation, and sort of look at that issue? Or is the issue part of our ideology? We're not going to admit any other comment. And so if you find that that's happening, or the other person is coming from a place of no change, don't go there. You're talking with somebody about politics, about religion, about all kinds of things in the culture. If you find out that you're getting no place with this person, you're probably dealing with someone who's living in an ideological world that has set beliefs, and they're not going to admit any other look at it. So discussing things with them gets you no place, other than people get mad, get angry. And so it's important as Christians that we not do that. If you run into a situation with someone that lives by an ideology, bless them, God loves them, take them out to lunch, do something nice for them. But don't get into an ideological debate because it'll get you no place, just like Jesus got no place with these Sadducees. And so if we run into that, it's important for us to recognize it, either own it if it's in us, or recognize it in other people, and just back off. The arguing is a huge waste of breath. You're not going to get any place with it. Because just as the Sadducees aren't going to agree with Jesus, there's no way, neither will people who live according to an ideology give up any of that. Because if they give up one aspect of that belief system, it comes apart. And so it's a threat to them. So as we move through these very uproarious times, it's important to recognize that in Christians we're called to live in peace, not to argue about everything. If you find yourself you're getting into an argumentative stance, just stop talking. Go talk about something else. But don't keep moving into that, because it's a real waste of energy. It's a real waste of a relationship. You can destroy a relationship through that kind of combative banging against an ideology that gets us no place. So we're called as Christians to live in peace, live in love. Reach out to people even if we don't agree with them. Just as Jesus couldn't convince the Sadducees, so we're not going to convince them of what we believe. But love them anyway. Love them and treat them with kindness. And we will get through this kind of tension, I'm sure. Someday this is all going to calm down a bit, I hope. But in the meantime, it's important that we be peacemakers and reach out to people with love and mercy that Jesus was reaching out to the Sadducees with.